our third speaker, Graham Turner from CSIRO. If you go to your webpage, there's some links to some really influential and crucial reports in this area I've worked on over the last couple of years. I'm sure you'll mention that in the material.
It might be that the number of PowerPoints and overheads increases with time. But hopefully there's not too much material in here. But having said that, I realise that my key messages page now spans 2 pages and not one. Anyway, you can see here, I think population is an important aspect to understanding our sustainability, but it's not the only one. And if I had to lean towards some sort of population future, it would be a low one for sustainability. Technology is another factor, but that can actually be make things worse, particularly if we just focus on efficiencies of things, largely simply because it stimulates further growth that outstrip the benefits of those efficiency gains. So for me, the key thing is actually changing behaviour, reducing consumption, the per capita aspect. And hopefully that will sort of come out through this presentation. Some of the other big messages here are that, and Mark sort of covered this a bit as well, that there are numerous challenges. It's not just that there are one, but there are many, and they interact. Trying to solve one tends to make another one worse. Might use the example of moving water around and needing therefore more energy. And perhaps the final sort of major point is that really it's like an insurance problem. There's a risk that we should consider in all of this. So if this diagram was my rather crude attempt to try and illustrate the risk issue, if on the vertical axis, we might foresee some very beautiful futures for the planet and its 8, 9, 10 billion people. But perhaps the probability of that future is very small. Maybe everyone can end up with an extra DVD, and maybe that's a more likely future. Or perhaps we'll slide into grubbiness. But there is also the possibility of a Mad Max type future where lots of people live horribly or die. And there might be a small probability of that happening, but we have to take all of those into account in weighing up what our responses will be. So the major part of this presentation is using some material of some colleagues, Barney Foran on the left and Francie Poldy, who still works with me at CSIRO. This is the Future Dilemmas report. We're continuing that work and updating it, but most of the material comes from that study. And this is based on a physical model of the economy of Australia. And here's just a schematic showing the major sectors that are in there. There's a lot of detail about the numbers of people and the stocks of houses and the stocks of cars and the amount of land used and so on and so forth. But it's basically done in physical terms, tonnes, litres and joules and so on, so that we can play scenarios out into the future and look at alternatives. And the way this works is we have, for example, a demographic model in one part of the framework. We might end up with a graph of total population into the future. And those people need households, so we form households, and then they will live in cities or rural areas. Each of those households has a car or some number of cars. That gets you the car stock, and then saying how many kilometres they drive per year and what the fuel efficiency is and so forth. You end up with figures of how much energy is used and how much CO2 is produced, for example. That sort of chain of physical relationships occurs through the whole of the stocks and flows framework. And here's a quick grab of a number of the different issues that have come out of the analysis of using that stocks and flows. And I won't go on to talk to each of these, or all of these. But just to summarise before we go into the detail a little bit, I've grouped some of these as issues to do with the input side of the economy, the resource use. Others to do with our lifestyle, so kind of like the engine of the economy, and then others to do with what comes out the tailpipe, if you like, of the economy. So let me just start with, I suppose, a definition of the different population futures that we looked at, and that you'll see occur all the way through the rest of the graphics, the rest of the data. You see three different population futures here, coming off the history period, growing to about 20 million at the turn of the century. We're now about 21 million. And different options for the immigration rate affecting population. So if we have net zero immigration, the population would climb and then start to decline. If we had kept it constant at about 70,000 per year, as it was back when this work was done in the mid-90s, coming up to 2000, then that's the population we would have, about 25 million by 2050. We're currently tracking close, or very close, to this high immigration population scenario. So we now have 21 million people. If we were to follow this sort of compounding growth in immigration, we would clearly be in the mid-30s by 2050. But that would then still imply some more growth built into that population. So by the end of the century, we might be something like 50 million people. One of the implications of that is this issue on the lifestyle, and in fact Peter was talking a good bit about this. And that is basically the workforce supporting the people who are no longer in the workforce, or are too young and too old to be in the workforce. And that's what this ratio shows. So currently we're at a very good point actually in this sort of trend where the number in the workforce are quite high relative to those that depend on the workforce. But irrespective of those population scenarios we just looked at,